Chapter 6. Conviction. There were several reasons why the ritual shouldn't have worked. The chalk circle hadn't only been disturbed once, but multiple times during Marion's struggle. There were severed lines and symbols smeared beyond recognition, which should have been enough to unbind what they'd accomplished. For the power to linger past this point could have only been the result of Talarian's presence. Once invoked, the god would not be dismissed so casually. Still, she hadn't believed Talarian would accept Illyriel, or any replacement. But if the god noticed she was a different person, he didn't seem to care. Cassia watched in horror as her sister was lifted off the ground, arms hanging limp to her sides, and her face raised toward the heavens. The undead god had accepted her immediately and without reservation. Perhaps he was reacting to the girl's determination, or maybe all that mattered were the ingested bones. Either way, it was happening too quickly. If a blood relative didn't join Illyriel in the circle, the result would be too horrible to bear. Without time to think, Cassia released her spear. The shaft twisted as the monster rose, but Cassia was already committed to her sprint. The beast followed close behind, sending a thrill through her veins. The creature's recovery was entirely unexpected, suggesting it wasn't so weak as she'd hoped.
Damn it!
She screamed, overcome with dread. Cassia had needed it to be weak, if only for a moment. But now, she'd reach the circle only to be torn to shreds at the same instant. As she closed the last few steps, however, she was taken by surprise. Both her spear and the crossbow bolt clattered to the ground. She'd seen this before, when the creatures left the countryside and strayed too close to a civilized area. The creatures didn't die, but lost their connection with the physical world. They were left with no choice but to turn back around. This was the result of Talarian's presence. Even dead, his influence was enough to push the abyssal current back and prevent this beast from entering the circle. With this realization, tears sprang to her eyes. Despite her keen awareness, this relief would be temporary. Once the ceremony ended and Talarian withdrew, she had no doubt she and her sister would still be in danger, which made it all the more important for this moment to count. As she stepped into position beside Chisandrel's collapsed form, she wondered if the girl would ever wake again. Before Cassia's attention was yanked back to her sister. All at once, surges of heat washed up through her muscles, beginning from her toes and rising through her head. Wave after wave gripped her in place, each pulse in sync with her beating heart. Removing her armor, or marking herself with blood, hadn't been necessary. The design of the circles, whole or otherwise, was enough to determine the binding's outcome. Though this role was initially meant for Chisandrel, it eagerly accepted a compatible substitute. Her breathing slowed, while her sweat cooled and hardened against her skin. All thoughts of battle were swept from mind, replaced by feelings of intense introspection. The world melted away, leaving Cassia alone with her thoughts and memories. Until she realized some of those thoughts were unfamiliar and not her own. As she examined these memories, those of a young girl who looked up to Cassia with the utmost admiration, she understood what this was. Nothing was held back. In a single instant, Cassia had access to her sister's most carefully guarded secrets, from her deepest fears to her moments of greatest shame. She saw an argument with Esmera, their mother, back when Cassia wasn't home. Esmera's anguish was surprising as she pleaded with Illyriel not to leave. This didn't match what Cassia remembered, who'd been told it was Mother's idea to send Illyriel to the garrison. There was an image of a boy Cassia had never met, sitting beside her on the dock as they dangled their feet above a canal near their home. That boy had been Illyriel's first kiss. Cassia wanted to look away, ashamed by this invasion of her sister's privacy. It wasn't that Illyriel would want to hide this boy, or that she'd feel embarrassed if Cassia found out. If Cassia had thought to ask, she felt confident the girl would have shared every detail. But that never happened. When the sisters were together, chatting into the night, their talks usually revolved around events at Wern's Hold. They'd both been content with their time together, and she never realized how much Illyriel had sacrificed. In the end, Illyriel had been truly happy. Cassia could see that now. But that didn't mean she didn't also feel loss. There were too many memories. So many that her confusion outweighed her epiphanies. And before Cassia could process the tiniest part, the feelings began to fade. As her sister's narrative caught up to the present, each emotion became replaced until one remained: paralyzing fear. The memories were gone, but Cassia still saw the world through her sister's eyes. One was covered beneath an enormous leathered hand. The other peered through the gap between index and thumb. And though it was Illyriel's face within the hand's tight grip, stretching her neck until it screamed in pain, to Cassia it felt like it was happening to her. Together, feet dangling, they stared into the eyes of an undead god. No matter how horrible or inexplicable it was to finally see one firsthand, Cassia had never considered how much worse it'd be for a god to look back at her. Those eyes, a deep, piercing blue, severed their minds as a sword through flesh. And while Cassia could not fathom the entirety of her own life, let alone her sister's, she was left with the impression that Talarian saw them both. He saw their lives laid bare, raw and exposed. His stern, elderly face was a blistering white, with cracks instead of wrinkles. His hair unkempt, withered and dry. It took no degree of faith to acknowledge if the god was real or not. This felt so strange. She felt compelled to reconsider what she knew of her religion. This experience demanded a different sort of faith. Faith in his divinity. Faith that she even wanted him to be real. That he continued to deserve her veneration. Despite her own terror, she could only imagine how much worse this would be for Illyriel.
Hold on.
She called out in her mind, hoping her sister would hear.
You're not alone. I am here with you.
Talarian didn't speak, But Cassia felt something happen, an intense pressure shaking the world. Something inside her broke, shattered. Searing pain threatened to consume her. A warm trickle ran down her thigh. No, not hers, Illyriel's. But despite all the pain, revulsion, and pity, it was nothing compared to her rising horror, for in that same moment, her sister's mind grew distant. Her brightly colored thoughts darkened and spoiled, and the connection between them withered and died.
No!
She screamed as tears clouded her vision. But it was Illyriel's voice she heard, not her own. Her head felt as though on fire.
Bring her back!
She demanded of the dispassionate god, who'd already begun to fade. As she was released from his grip, her legs folded beneath her, her knees crashed into stone. She caught herself with her hands, with Illyriel's familiar, slender hands.
You can't do this to her!
She screamed.
It was never meant to be her.
Her cries, however, were completely ignored. The room went dark, leaving no sign Talarian had ever been there. She screamed in rage, so loud it overpowered the dampening aura and sent a trembling echo through the surrounding cavern. What was worse, her anger wasn't directed at Talarian so much as herself. Though the result had been born of godly power, she'd been the one who'd conducted the ritual. This, however, this was not what she'd wanted. As her mind struggled to keep up, she was suddenly struck and thrown sideways. The world turned over as she sprawled over stone.
Damn it!
She screamed as she rose on bare feet outside the chalk circle's edge. Her knees burned and she'd scraped her shoulder blade. It was a blow that would have broken bones for a regular human. But as her mind snapped into focus, she was keenly aware of specific changes. Wearing nothing more than a silken slip, with no armor to think of, Cassia was surprised she didn't feel vulnerable. In some ways, the light material felt liberating, with nothing to restrict her mobility or speed. Everything was so different. Illyriel's body was thinner than she was used to, shorter, but oh, not nearly so frail as she'd imagined. Cassia had never felt so strong in her life. The pain from her scrapes had already begun to heal. It was only then she let her eyes take in the abyssal current, the blood dripping from stalactites and the rancid carmine pools. After so many years dreaming of this moment, it felt strange to have it thrust upon her so suddenly, and to see it through her sister's eyes, no less. The first thing she noticed was that the cavern was darker, much darker, with only a cool sputtering from the pale fires. Somehow, though, there wasn't a single part of the chamber too difficult to see. With the aid of ascendancy, she could discern the most acute colors, more vividly than she'd thought possible, even in the most obscured and heavily shadowed recess. Only a heartbeat had passed since rising to her feet, but her mind absorbed every detail at remarkable speed. Most surprising was the hideous creature regarding her across the circle. appearing nothing at all like she'd been led to believe. Knowing its many legs, she'd expected a segmented body more akin to an insect's. But aside from its long, bulbous torso, reminiscent of a mantis, any similarities ended there. Instead, she saw an amalgamation of what appeared to be spindly human parts. This singular detail told her this was not the same variety that commonly attacked on the roads. It also explained why it was no longer with the pack, as night maidens were more than capable of hunting on their own. Its anatomy was lithe and feminine, with pale white skin. Its hide wasn't soft or thin, as its human physique might suggest, but hardened and rubbery, like an embalmed corpse. It bore the signs from its earlier struggle with Cassia, displaying lacerations that oozed with gelatinous, blackened blood. From the Night Maiden's ridged back sprouted forelegs that didn't appear to serve a purpose. They pointed into the air like useless wings. From their slender, curved shapes and smooth, hairless skin, they shared an uncanny resemblance with a human female, with one significant difference. In place of blunted toenails, they had long, blackened claws. Similar spines protruded from its hairless tail. Still more jutted out from its 2 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of arms. Chopping it off, its head was framed by long black hair. Lanky strands hung past its shoulders to cling, matted and tangled, against slimy ribs. It had a sleek, feminine face, but with uninterrupted skin where its eyes should be. From the corners of its mouth, with lips that appeared quite ordinary, were cuts extending that smile almost entirely to its ears. This was all the more apparent when, in the next instant, it unhinged its jaw, splitting its face wide open to reveal a massive maw of black, drooling teeth. Cassia observed all this in a few seconds, and, just as quickly, devised a plan. She needed time to acclimate to her new agility, and, more importantly, her limitations. And though her muscles tingled with anticipation, feeling confident she could move faster than the Night Maiden, it'd be foolish to attack it head on. For this reason, she made no move toward the spear it had dropped, laying much too close to the creature's clammy feet. Instead, she tucked into a roll in the direction of her knives. She tried hard not to look at herself as she pulled the blades from her unconscious body, lying beside Chisandrel's. She didn't have time to consider if this transfer was permanent, or if she might return to that body later.
Come on, then,
She yelled, raising her blades in invitation. The Night Maiden shrieked in response, arched its back, and clambered toward her on its varied limbs. Cassia leaped again, luring it away from the circle and away from the vulnerable sleepers. Through Illyriel's ascendancy, she couldn't change the orientation of the world or gravity, as Tenlin had done with his equilibrium. In much the same way, without the skills of transfiguration, she couldn't pass through the stone as though it were water. Cassia couldn't alter anything from the 7 other realms, but through the rules of her own, on which she'd spent years of her life in careful study, she could change something else. Through conviction, she could transform intent. Throwing her knife, she instilled it with purpose, to pierce the skin where the beast's eye was supposed to be and plunge deep into its brain. With alarming speed, the Night Maiden twisted to evade. So quickly, Cassia felt sure her blade would miss regardless. But she needn't have worried. The knife altered its trajectory and buried itself hilt deep with a sickening squelch. The creature shrieked like a madwoman. Cassia could hardly believe it. She had seen blades swerve before, but not nearly so fast. Was it possible Illyriel's conviction was so superior to her teacher's? Unfortunately, even a puncture to the brain wouldn't bring the creature down. It had also left her with one less knife. Her throw, however, hadn't been meant to stop the Night Maiden so much as to provide distraction. While it wailed and moaned, she leaped to the side and took up the rope Marion had found in the storeroom. It hurt to be reminded of her recent death, but Cassia could have blessed the woman for bringing this out. Already the creature was lumbering toward her. With nimble fingers, she looped an end around her knife's wooden handle. She made a knot with a singular purpose: to hold the knife secure no matter what. She rolled away from the Night Maiden's charge and threw, while never letting go of the rope's other end. As before, her aim was flawless, sliding into the same bleeding eye socket beside the first she'd thrown. Rolling up onto a knee, Cassia whipped out her arm, sending a powerful undulation through the length of rope. This extracted the weapon from its lodged position, while simultaneously accomplishing its secondary purpose: to hook beneath the hilt of the other knife and pull it free. Both metal blades returned through the air, still hooked together. She yanked again, curving the handle's path so they'd land perfectly into her outstretched, free hand. She wasn't only thrilled this worked, but that she'd made it happen on her first try.
Ha!
She taunted.
Didn't expect that, did you?
The Night Maiden rounded on her, black blood oozing from its obliterated face. Cassia attacked again, cracking the rope like a whip. The creature's head snapped back as her blade slammed through its windpipe. Even this wasn't enough to kill, but it did stop the screaming. As the knife slid free, Cassia swung the blade in a wide arc. She targeted its vulnerable tendons in a few sweeping circles, lightning fast. The problem with knife blades, however, was that they didn't cut deep. After half a dozen slashes, she knew this approach was taking too long. The maiden tried to shriek, but it sounded more like a pained gargle as blood sputtered from its exposed throat. Then it pounced. Cassia leaped aside and felt the ground tremble beneath the impact. Her rope whirred through the air, never slowing its circular momentum, even as Cassia came up from her roll. Knowing she needed to increase her game, she redirected her blade, not toward the creature, but off to one side. The rope caught beneath the head of Mayleen's statue before wrapping around the neck and sending the knife whipping back at the creature. Even from this precarious angle, her knife once again found the Night Maiden's eye socket. This time, however, she told the weapon to go deeper and to rotate once inside. With the blade turned sideways, its ends became caught against the creature's skull. When Cassia pulled, the knife acted like an anchor, snapping the creature's head toward the top of Mayleen's statue. A moment later, however, the Night Maiden reared back. It bucked sideways and dragged Cassia forward. The rope cut through her palms, and it was all she could do to keep her feet beneath her, bare toes gripping stone.
Damn it!
She hissed, realizing her plan wouldn't work. In a pure contest of strength, the Night Maiden was more than Illyriel's match. Moreover, it was larger and heavier. If she wanted to win, she'd have to get creative. With a few rotations of her shoulder, she wrapped the rope around her arm, ensuring her grip, before she leaped toward a second statue. The rope flew her in a circle around this new anchor and whipped her to the other side. Before the Night Maiden could pull her back the way she came, she drove her foot against the stone and used its weight to hold herself in place. For a moment, this seemed to work. With the creature's head stretched back, the rope secured it in place. And though its limbs clawed against the stone, and gouts of blood erupted from its throat, it was unable to come closer. Unfortunately, it soon diverted its attention toward the rope, thrashing with its claws.
Stop that!
She screamed, as she felt an enormous draw on her strength. Ordinarily, the rope would have been torn to shreds. The only reason it held together was because of her ascendancy. She'd given it a purpose, and it was doing everything in its power to fulfill her demands. But even then, the ancient rope could only do so much. The longer this went on, it would only get worse. The draw on her strength would increase exponentially, to the point she'd be too weak to continue the fight. If she didn't think fast, she'd lose her advantage.
Sorry for this.
She muttered, driving her foot against the statue and pushing with all her strength. Nothing happened. She'd wanted to use the stone's weight to hoist the Night Maiden upward, but the statue didn't budge.
No!
She shrieked, only then realizing how much strength she'd lost. Moments earlier, this approach might have worked, but the statue was too heavy.
Damn it.
She hissed as she searched for a new plan. The obvious solution was to let go of the rope, to accept her mistake and salvage what strength she had left. As long as she avoided its attacks, with some luck, she might get the chance to recover from weakness. To hell with that. Holding fast to the rope, Cassia allowed herself to be pulled forward, whipping around the statue by the Night Maiden's strength. Now that the rope only supported her weight, it had an easier time keeping together. It provided centripetal force and circled Cassia around the creature and Maylene statue. This untethered the Night Maiden from its anchor, but only for a moment. Giving her own body purpose, she redirected her flight. She tightened her revolution to rebind the creature to the statue more quickly. The Night Maiden lashed out as she came within reach. Cassia contorted midair, twisting her trajectory through the mass of limbs, avoiding them entirely as she made her first revolution. But after she wrapped around the statue and passed the creature a second time, there was less rope to work with, and she wasn't so lucky. Claws raked her upper arm, and she felt a flash of searing pain. Somehow she didn't let go, while twisting enough to keep the cuts superficial. Cassia didn't stop until she was safely behind the statue. She stood against it with her feet, having bound the Night Maiden in place, with the rope caught squarely across its neck. Then, with savage strength, she pulled. The statue trembled as the creature bucked and thrashed. But Cassia held tight, knowing her life depended on it. Her vision blurred as her strength took a dip. Even with the statue blocking her view, she knew the Night Maiden was clawing the rope again, clawing its own neck.
Just die already!
She screamed, pulling even harder. While she couldn't assign intent to another living creature, and couldn't command the Night Maiden itself to die, she could work with the rope. With all her focus, she willed the fibers to dig deep, to saw back and forth across the previously severed windpipe, and, once past that, to target the weakness between vertebrae. Cassia willed herself to stay awake, feeling both the rope and her sanity withering dangerously thin.
Almost there.
There came a splintering crack. Drained of strength, Cassia collapsed backward, unable to stop her head from slamming the ground. Pain flashed through her skull, but even this felt distant as she drifted toward unconsciousness.
No.
She screamed in her mind.
Not yet.
Opposite the statue, she saw limbs still writhing. Cassia could do nothing as the Night Maiden extracted itself from the rope.
This is it,
she thought, as it crawled into view. Its movements were sporadic, each step causing its muscles to spasm. Cassia tried to rise, but couldn't. Her second knife, the one not tied to the rope, was missing. It had likely fallen when her strength gave out. The Night Maiden was slow, but gods, there was nothing she could do. Until she realized its head was missing, and the beast wasn't crawling toward her at all. She should have felt relieved, but she only felt numb. Her head sank back to the floor as though never to rise again. From the corner of her eye, she tracked the Night Maiden's progress away into the darkness, knowing it could take up to an hour before the twitching limbs realized it was dead. Minutes passed, and Cassia did little more than stare into the dark. She lacked the energy to think. More than that, she lacked the desire to remember. As an ascendant, however, it wasn't long before her strength recovered. But even then, she rose to her feet in a mindless stupor. She came around the statue and extracted her knife from the severed head, ignoring its jaw as it snapped and drooled. She found her other knife nearby. Her mind was in a haze until she realized she wasn't alone.
"Drop your weapons,"
came the yell, almost frenzied in quality.
"Put them down, or your sister dies."
A lump rose in Cassia's throat. From the moment he spoke, she knew it was Velt. He was supposed to be gone, but he was here somehow, and holding a knife to her neck. More specifically, the neck of her unconscious body.
"No sudden movements, you hear?"
he said.
"Just set your knives down."
Cassia stared in confusion, her mind still reeling. Damn it all! She'd won the fight against the true enemy, and now she had to deal with this? But despite whatever power she possessed, with all her strength and speed, nothing changed the fact she was now utterly helpless. She didn't understand what had happened or what Velt was doing here, but she understood that blade. There was a clatter as her knives and rope slid from her fingers.
Good,
said Velt.
Now, I need you to listen carefully. Just listen, and nobody gets hurt.
Cassia tried to understand her bond with her sister. If the transition, after all, was meant to be permanent and should remain inside Illyriel's body forever, then Velt's threats would mean nothing. It'd mean her old body was nothing more than a lifeless memento, and she could attack him without regard for the consequences. But for some reason, that didn't feel right. Though she no longer sensed a connection with herself, she felt one was there, and it was vitally important. If Velt slit her throat, she might very well die.
I know how this looks,
he continued.
But I don't want to kill you. You're a good person, Elle. You're not to blame for what happened here.
Cassia said nothing. Velt was mistaken over specific details. He'd witnessed enough of the action to know the ceremony was successful, but he had no way of knowing he wasn't speaking with Illyriel. He'd just assumed Cassia had been knocked out in the fight. And Cassia couldn't blame him. Even she didn't fully understand what had happened.
But this,
he said, gesturing toward her with his free hand.
This isn't natural. You can feel that, can't you? The wrongness behind it all?
Look at me, Velt.
She raised both hands so he wouldn't feel threatened.
Listen to my voice and look into my eyes. Do I appear insane to you?
The question took him by surprise. He looked down for a moment before doing as she'd suggested. He met her gaze and furrowed his brow in deep consideration. But then he shook his head.
I want to believe you. I truly do. But even if you aren't aware of the problem, it's become a part of who you are, and it will never go away.
What are you talking about?
Has it never occurred to you,
he asked,
the state of the world, the rise of the abyss? Is it too difficult to conceive it's all the result of ascendancy?
Something about this statement gave Casey a pause. It felt familiar, as though she'd heard this line of reasoning before. And she realized she had.
Oh, gods,
she breathed.
You're one of them.
This prompted a dry chuckle from Velt.
So quick to judge. Does that make this easier for you? To give me a label and brand me for my beliefs? Will you so quickly disregard the truth when it's right in front of you?
Cassia groaned, already certain they'd never reach an understanding. Velt frowned.
Don't you find it odd the creature came back?
Not really.
He pressed further.
What about the timing? Was it a coincidence it appeared as the ritual neared the end?
Cassia shook her head.
You weren't here.
I wasn't,
he admitted.
But you know I'm right. It was ascendancy that lured it here, as it always has.
His argument was an old one. The observation that there were more recorded appearances of abyssal threats, while ascendants were nearby. But even though the creatures might be drawn to their power, like how the creatures had focused their efforts on Tenlin. It didn't imply causation. It only meant they prioritized threats. In the end, it was an argument that didn't even matter. Even if some tie existed between the current and ascendancy, what were they supposed to do? Abandon ascendancy? Cease their only defense against a relentless foe? While a few people were insane enough to believe this would solve the problem, Cassia was sure it would not. Besides, there was something else wrong with Velt's argument.
You're right about the timing,
she said.
But do you expect me to believe its arrival wasn't a coincidence, while yours somehow was?
Velt tried to protest, but Cassia pushed on.
Why should I listen to anything you say when the most likely explanation was that you were the one to lead it here?
That isn't.
His sudden frustration confirmed the truth, and the realization filled her with an overpowering fury.
Why?
She demanded, thinking back to the horror she'd endured and everyone who died. Gods, everything might have gone smoothly were it not for his involvement. Even her sister might still.
Stay back,
he yelled, readjusting his grip on the knife.
There's only one way we're doing this, or I swear I'll slit her throat.
Cassia froze.
Step back,
he said, pointing with his chin.
Go on.
In her moment's hesitation, Velt slid a shallow cut across her cheek. Cassia gasped and stumbled backward. A red line blossomed across her skin, clear in her vision despite the distance. At the same time, she felt a twinge. It wasn't pain exactly. She couldn't feel the cut on her face, but she felt something nonetheless. It was almost like being trapped in a dream, that moment when she could feel someone shaking her, but waking up felt like an insurmountable challenge. Her mind was stuck, half asleep, and unable to respond to the call of danger.
What do you want?
She demanded, her anger rising.
The ceremony's done. Finished. Even if I wanted to reverse the outcome, it's impossible.
Come back with me,
he said.
We'll figure something out. Like I said at the start, I'd rather not kill anyone.
Cassia knew better than to trust what he said. Instead, she returned her attention to that feeling, the connection she'd felt when she'd been cut. It was as though a conduit tied the sisters together, but it was like searching for a muscle she'd never used. If she could figure it out and somehow switch to her own body, she could take him by surprise. Upon any resistance, she could always drive a knee into his groin.
This is bullshit,
she said, hoping to keep him distracted.
You might not have a reason to kill Cassia, but me?
She asked, placing a hand on her chest.
You can't fix this.
Velt grit his teeth.
But you've known that all along, haven't you? The only problem is you don't know how to kill me yet. So rather than point that knife at me where it belongs, you take the coward's approach and threaten a helpless woman.
At that moment, she found the right muscle, and Cassia let go. She wasn't sure how she did it, but it was not unlike letting her knives fall free. In one instant, her mind clung to Illyriel, and in the next, she'd slipped back and was lying on the floor, feeling the cold bite of steel. But something was wrong. When her arms sprang into action, they were sluggish. Her efforts to control his hands were weak and clumsy, ultimately doing nothing more than letting him know she was awake.
Stop,
he demanded, with one hand overpowering her arm, while his other brought the knife even closer to her throat.
Don't move.
Cassia wanted to scream in frustration. After everything it had cost to return to her body, she'd only given up her advantage of ascendancy. More than that, this body was exhausted. It was her own mistake for not realizing it sooner. It wasn't just fatigue. This body had been awake for nearly 24 hours. Her best option was to go back and try again with Illyriel. Velt's expression changed from confidence to confusion. His gaze alternated between Cassia and her sister. Only then did she realize the girl had collapsed. Velt's mind, no doubt, was racing to find the correlation, why Cassia would wake at the moment her sister fainted.
What's going on?
He demanded.
What did you do?
Cassia refused to answer.
Stand up,
he said, without removing the knife. Acutely aware of the blade's edge, it took a surprising amount of strength to speak.
You don't have to do this.
On your feet.
Slowly, Cassia propped herself up.
You weren't here for Marion's solution,
She said.
the method she proposed to counter insanity.
What is this nonsense?
He demanded. The clues, however, were already laid out. This was merely a continuation of his conversation with Illyriel.
We've been bonded.
She explained.
It's the reason this works.
Explain.
From the corner of her eye, she detected movement. As Velt studied her gaze, Illyriel rose behind him. Cassia pretended not to see, her mind struggling to understand what this possibly meant. By some miracle, was this actually her sister? Or what remained of a broken mind?
Look at me.
She said, not wanting him to notice.
Even if you believe my sister's broken, I want you to look at me and tell me I'm insane.
This is...
Velt's expression changed to bewilderment.
We can still fix this.
No,
She said.
we can't.
Velt turned, finally sensing something amiss. In panic, he shoved Cassia back to the stone. She scrambled to catch herself, but only succeeded at reducing the blow to her head. Even so, she kept her eyes trained on Velt as he raised his knife toward her sister. Illyriel let out a savage cry. His eyes flicked back to Cassia.
But you're still... How are you...
Velt was interrupted as Illyriel pounced, more akin to a panther than an adolescent girl. She crossed the 10-foot gap and was on him, digging her fingertips into his head. One bare foot was on his hip, and the other on his shoulder. The impact sent Velt stumbling back, and he cried out in surprise. Anyone weaker might have tripped and fallen, but Velt regained his footing and fought back. In sudden fear, Cassia scrambled to her feet as she watched Velt's hand seize Illyriel's throat. His other drove his knife hilt deep into her leg. Illyriel let out a scream, not of pain, but something more like rage. Cassia rushed forward and pounded fists into his back. Weak as she was, this didn't accomplish much. In the end, when he toppled onto his back, it had more to do with the raving girl atop him. Hilariel's knee struck the ground near his chest, while her other leg, the one that had been on his shoulder, now stretched taut and planted her heel by his head. Ignoring the knife buried in her thigh, Illyriel effortlessly grabbed Velt's wrist and forced him to release her throat. And in an impossible contortion, her head came down. The girl sank her teeth deep into the man's neck, before jerking upward and ripping up long strands of bright red flesh. The Nightmare Throne by Lynn Clark releases September 27th everywhere books are sold. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon in standard hardcover, paperback, ebook, as well as the audiobook you've already started listening to. The printed version features 50 illustrations produced by the author himself, including chapter headers, full-page artwork, and a double-page map in black and white. Furthermore, from right now until September 27th, a special deluxe full-color edition is available for purchase on Kickstarter. This includes the same 50 illustrations printed in color, as well as a dust jacket, custom end papers, sprayed edges, and alternate artwork printed along the case laminate, featuring both sisters on opposite sides. This version will be signed and numbered by the author in the order of Kickstarter backer number. That way, people who pledge earlier will receive a lower and more collectible number. Just search for The Nightmare Throne by Lynn Clark, or check the show notes of this podcast for the relevant links.